In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, when 7 of the most dangerous gang members in Chicago disrespected the Quran, they believed no one could stop them. But that very night, strange dreams, a mysterious voice, and unbearable pain began to haunt them. What happened next forced these feared men to fall to their knees. Stay till the end to discover this shocking and powerful story. Welcome to the YouTube channel Truth and Belief. The winter wind moved through the streets of Chicago like a blade, sliding between towering buildings and carrying the smell of wet pavement into the darker corners of the city. On the south side, inside a forgotten warehouse covered in faded graffiti, 7 men sat around a worn wooden table under a flickering fluorescent light. The room smelled of smoke, liquor, and cold metal. These men were known throughout the neighborhood as the most feared gang in the district. Marcus Hale sat at the head of the table. At 6'6" and tall and built like a concrete wall, he looked more like a living weapon than a man. Black tattoos covered his arms and climbed up his neck, ending beneath a large skull design on the side of his throat. His expression rarely changed, and his voice carried the cold authority of someone who had ruled the streets for years. Around him sat his closest companions: Derek Stone, Ryan Cole, Lucas Ward, Ethan Cross, Tyler Grant, and Noah Briggs. Each of them was heavily tattooed, hardened by violence and shaped by lives that taught them that strength alone controlled the world. They had grown up believing that power belonged to the ruthless. For Marcus and his crew, religion was nothing more than weakness, disguised as hope. They often mocked anyone who spoke about faith or morality. To them, the world was simple. Those who were strong survived, and those who were weak were crushed beneath them. One gray afternoon, the 7 men walked through a quiet Chicago park. Their heavy boots crunched against the gravel path as pedestrians quickly moved aside, avoiding eye contact. Fear followed them everywhere like a shadow. Near the edge of the park, an elderly immigrant sat quietly on a wooden bench. In his hands, he held a small green book with golden lettering on its cover. His lips moved softly as he read, unaware of the approaching figures. Marcus noticed the book immediately. He tilted his head slightly toward it, and the rest of the gang understood without a word. They spread out around the bench, forming a silent circle. The old man slowly looked up. Marcus reached forward and snatched the book from his hands. His tattooed fingers turned it over with open curiosity. "So, this is what keeps people bowing their heads," Marcus said in a deep voice. The old man stood shakily and spoke with quiet urgency. "Please, that is our holy book." Marcus gave a cold laugh. "To you, maybe." Without hesitation, he opened the book and began ripping the pages apart. Thin sheets of paper drifted into the cold wind and scattered across the sidewalk. The old man fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he tried to gather the torn pages. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered prayers in a language Marcus did not understand. Marcus watched him with irritation. Seeing someone bow in devotion made something inside him burn with anger. "Stand up," Marcus said sharply, but the old man continued to bow his head, whispering quietly to the creator he believed in. Marcus kicked the bench aside. "Where is your God now?" he demanded. "If he exists, why doesn't he stop me?" The other men laughed as they stepped on the scattered pages beneath their boots. For them, it felt like victory. They walked away from the park, convinced that nothing in the universe could challenge them. That night, however, the city felt strangely different. The wind that normally howled through Chicago streets fell silent. The sky darkened into an unnatural shade of black, and the entire neighborhood seemed to sink into an uneasy stillness. Marcus lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eventually pulled him into darkness, but what followed was not a normal dream. He suddenly found himself standing in a vast desert under a sky-colored deep copper red. There was no sun, yet the air burned with strange heat. The sand stretched endlessly in every direction. Marcus turned in confusion. For the first time in many years, he felt completely powerless. Then a voice echoed through the empty desert. It did not sound like a human voice. It carried a weight that shook the ground beneath him. "Return." The word struck his mind like thunder. Marcus dropped to his knees, gripping his head as an intense pressure filled his skull. The voice spoke again, stronger than before. "Return before it is too late." Marcus woke up suddenly in his bed, gasping for air. Cold sweat covered his body. Across the city, in 6 different apartments and houses, the other members of the gang woke up at the exact same moment. The next morning they gathered again in their warehouse headquarters. None of them spoke at first. Dark circles surrounded their eyes. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I saw a desert," he whispered. Derek looked up slowly. The sky was red. Lucas leaned forward, and there was a voice. A heavy silence filled the room. All 7 men had experienced the exact same dream. Marcus tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. Probably just stress, he said. But deep inside, something had already begun to crack. Over the next few nights, the dream returned again and again. Every time they closed their eyes, the same desert appeared. The same overwhelming voice echoed across the endless sand, and each time the message remained the same: return. Soon fear replaced the confidence they had carried for years. Sleep became something they dreaded. Yet an even stranger event was waiting for them. One afternoon, the gang walked through a neighborhood known for its immigrant community. Small shops lined the streets, and a modest mosque stood quietly between 2 brick buildings. As Marcus passed by the mosque's loudspeaker, a familiar call rose gently into the air. The call inviting believers to prayer. To most people, it sounded peaceful. But for the 7 men, the moment the sound reached their ears, a violent pain exploded inside their heads. Marcus collapsed onto the sidewalk, clutching his temples. The others fell beside him, overwhelmed by a pressure so intense it felt like their minds were being torn apart. Pedestrians stopped in shock as the once fearsome gang writhed on the pavement in agony. And for the first time in their lives, Marcus Hale and his companions realized something terrifying. Their strength meant nothing against the unseen force now confronting them. The journey that would shatter their arrogance had only just begun. The pain ended as suddenly as it had begun. Marcus Hale lay on the sidewalk, breathing heavily, while the distant call to prayer faded into the air. Around him, Derek, Ryan, Lucas, Ethan, Tyler, and Noah slowly pushed themselves up from the pavement. The people on the street stared in confusion, unsure what they had just witnessed. Marcus wiped sweat from his face and tried to stand, but his legs felt weak. For years, these men had ruled the streets through fear. Now they looked like frightened strangers inside their own bodies. An ambulance eventually took them to a nearby hospital. Doctors examined their ears, ran scans, and tested their nerves. The results confused everyone in the room. There was no injury, no infection, no physical damage that could explain the unbearable pain they had experienced. A middle-aged nurse quietly observed them from the corner of the room. She noticed the tattoos covering their skin and the uneasy tension in their eyes. Before leaving the room, she spoke softly. "Sometimes pain does not come from the body," she said. "Sometimes it is a warning meant for the heart." Her words followed Marcus long after they left the hospital. Back at the warehouse, the gang no longer looked like kings of Chicago. They avoided going outside. Every unfamiliar sound made them flinch. Even the distant echo of sirens or church bells made their muscles tighten in fear. Sleep was worse. Every night the same desert appeared. Every night the same powerful voice echoed across the burning sky. Return. Marcus tried to bury the fear beneath anger, but the memories would not disappear. He kept remembering the old man in the park, the calm expression on his face while the sacred book had been torn apart, the strength that existed in his humility. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the skyline, a faint sound drifted through the cracks of the warehouse windows. The call inviting people to prayer had begun again somewhere in the distance. Instantly, Marcus felt the pressure return inside his head. It was not as violent as before, but it was enough to make his heart pound. The others grabbed their heads in fear, expecting the unbearable agony to strike again. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt completely defeated. His mind returned to the desert, the voice, the command that had shaken his soul. Return. Marcus slowly dropped to his knees on the cold warehouse floor. The movement shocked the others. They had seen Marcus break bones without hesitation, but they had never seen him kneel before anything. Tears filled his eyes as the pressure inside his chest tightened. "I can't fight this anymore," he whispered. The others stared silently. Marcus tried to remember the words he had once heard people say outside the mosque, words he had mocked many times. His voice trembled. "There is only one true God," he said slowly. The pressure inside his head eased slightly. Marcus took a deep breath. "And Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger." The moment the words left his mouth, the pain vanished. The room fell completely silent. Marcus lowered his head and breathed deeply as a strange calm spread through his body. Derek stepped forward first. "What did you just say?" he asked. Marcus looked up, his expression different from anything they had seen before. "I stopped fighting," he replied quietly. One by one, the others slowly lowered themselves to their knees. The same words followed. Within minutes, the 7 men who had once mocked faith now sat silently on the warehouse floor, overwhelmed by a peace they had never experienced before. But their journey was only beginning. They knew almost nothing about the religion they had just accepted. The next few days were filled with questions. They searched for information. They watched lectures. They spoke with people from the local community. For the first time, Marcus learned that faith was not about fear or weakness. It was about discipline, humility, and responsibility. Still, Chicago was not the place for their transformation. Everyone in the city knew their past. Every street reminded them of violence. One night, Marcus spread a world map across the warehouse table. His finger moved slowly across continents until it stopped on a chain of islands in Southeast Asia, Indonesia. He had read that millions of Muslims lived there peacefully, a place where faith shaped daily life, a place far away from the chaos they had known. "We need to start over somewhere new," Marcus said. Derek folded his arms. "You mean leave Chicago?" Marcus nodded. "If we stay here, we'll fall back into the same life." No one argued. Within a week, the 7 men sold what they could, gathered their remaining money, and booked plane tickets across the world. The long flight felt unreal. For most of the journey, they sat quietly, thinking about everything that had changed in such a short time. When the plane finally landed in Jakarta, warm tropical air rushed through the airport doors. The humidity wrapped around them like a blanket. Marcus stepped forward first, his massive frame towering above the travelers around him. Even though they wore simple clothes now, their tattoos still made people stare. Old habits followed them like shadows. Their expressions remained serious. Their steps were still heavy. They were Muslims now, but they were still the same men who had once ruled Chicago through fear. As they walked through the crowded airport terminal, Marcus accidentally collided with a small local man carrying several bags. The man's phone dropped to the floor. Marcus immediately felt his old instincts rise. In Chicago, moments like this often ended in violence. His fists tightened. He prepared himself for an argument. But something unexpected happened. The small man quickly picked up his phone, bowed his head politely, and smiled warmly. "I'm very sorry," he said in gentle English. "I should have been watching where I was going." Marcus froze. The man continued smiling. "Welcome to Indonesia, sir. I hope your journey was safe." Then he simply walked away. Marcus stood motionless. Behind him, Derek scratched his head in confusion. "He apologized to us," Derek said. Ryan shook his head. "We ran into him." Marcus looked around the airport again. For the first time, something strange stirred inside his chest. It wasn't fear, it was humility. The transformation that had begun in Chicago was about to be tested in ways none of them expected, and they were about to discover that true strength was not measured by fists or intimidation. It was measured by kindness. Marcus Hale stood silently in the middle of Jakarta's crowded airport, still watching the man who had just walked away with a friendly smile. The moment was small, almost ordinary, yet it shook something deep inside him. In Chicago, collisions like that often ended with shouting, threats, or fists. Here, the man had simply apologized and welcomed them. Marcus slowly lowered his hands. His fists relaxed. Behind him, Derek Stone let out a quiet breath. "That guy wasn't scared at all," Derek muttered. Ryan Cole looked around the airport hall. People passed by calmly, some glancing curiously at the 7 tall foreigners covered with tattoos, but none of the looks carried fear or hostility. "They're not avoiding us," Ryan said. "They're just normal," Marcus said. Nothing. But inside his mind, something continued to shift. The group stepped outside the terminal into the warm evening air of Jakarta. The humidity felt heavy compared to the cold winters of Chicago. Motorcycles buzzed through the streets, vendors sold food along sidewalks, and the city moved with a calm rhythm that felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel like the center of attention. They eventually found a small guest house in a narrow neighborhood street. The owner, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted them politely and showed them to their rooms without asking unnecessary questions. That night, Marcus lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Somewhere far away, the gentle call to prayer rose into the sky. This time, there was no pain. Instead, the sound carried a strange comfort. The next morning, the 7 men walked through the neighborhood streets, exploring their surroundings. Small shops were opening, children were walking to school, and neighbors greeted one another with smiles. Many people noticed the tattoos covering the Americans' arms and necks, but no one stepped away in fear. Instead, a fruit seller waved at them cheerfully. "Good morning, brother." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Brother," the word echoed quietly in his mind. Later that afternoon, they followed a crowd walking toward a large mosque with a green dome. It was Friday, and people from every direction were gathering for the weekly prayer. Marcus hesitated at the entrance. His massive frame stood out among the crowd of worshippers dressed in white shirts and traditional caps. The tattoos on his neck suddenly felt heavier than ever. Derek leaned closer. "Maybe we should wait outside," he whispered. Marcus looked at the open doors of the mosque. For a moment he remembered the day in Chicago when he had mocked people who bowed their heads in prayer. Now he was the one standing uncertainly. "We came here to learn," Marcus finally said. He stepped forward. Inside, rows of worshippers quietly prepared for the prayer. The atmosphere was calm and respectful. Marcus and his friends moved toward the back row so they would not disturb anyone. As the prayer began, the imam's voice recited passages from the sacred book with a melody Marcus had never heard before. The words were unfamiliar, but the rhythm carried a peaceful weight. Marcus followed the movements of the prayer slowly, standing, bowing, prostrating. When his forehead touched the carpet, something inside him softened. For years, his head had never bowed to anything. Now he felt strangely free. After the prayer ended, Marcus expected people to stare or question them. Instead, a man beside him extended his hand with a friendly smile. "Peace be upon you." Marcus hesitated before shaking the man's hand. More people approached. Another man greeted Derek warmly. A young student shook Ryan's hand and welcomed him in English. Then, an elderly man with a gentle face stepped forward and stopped in front of Marcus. The old man looked up at the towering American and asked softly, "New Muslim?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. The old man wrapped his arms around Marcus and hugged him. "Welcome home, my brother." Marcus froze. No one had ever embraced him like that without fear or expectation. His throat tightened. For years he had believed respect came only through intimidation. Yet this small elderly man showed him a form of dignity far stronger than violence. Marcus suddenly felt tears burning in his eyes. He lowered his head, overwhelmed by emotion. Around him, Derek, Ryan, Lucas, Ethan, Tyler, and Noah experienced the same moment. Members of the congregation offered them water, spoke kindly to them, and welcomed them as part of the community. No one judged their tattoos. No one reminded them of their past. That evening, the 7 men walked back through the quiet neighborhood streets under the soft glow of city lights. Marcus looked up at the night sky. "I used to think strength meant dominating people," he said quietly. Derek nodded. "Yeah, me too." Ryan glanced back toward the mosque. "But today," he said, "we saw something stronger." Marcus folded his arms thoughtfully. "Kindness," he said. Over the following weeks, the 7 former gang members slowly adapted to their new life. They began learning the basics of their faith. They practiced prayer. They helped local volunteers distribute food during the month of Ramadan. Their physical strength, once used to intimidate people, now helped them carry heavy supplies for charity work. The tattoos on their bodies remained as reminders of their past. But their hearts had changed. One evening near the end of Ramadan, Marcus stood in the courtyard of the mosque as the voices of worshippers echoed praises to God across the city. This time the words did not frighten him. They filled him with peace. Marcus turned to his friends and smiled slightly. "Chicago is where we were born," he said. "But this," he gestured toward the mosque, the community, and the quiet streets around them, "this is where we finally learned how to live." And under the warm Jakarta night sky, the 7 men who were once feared as the toughest gang in Chicago discovered a truth they had never known before. True strength was not found in power or fear. It was found in humility, faith, and the courage to